and gentlemen, welcome to our last History in the Hall Roadshow for 2026. I'm going to have them keep bringing in the food and drink for you all. We just want to thank you all for coming in. How many people are here for the first time? Anybody? Excellent. I hope everybody told you what a great show it was, and you can say that when we're done. There you go. If you would, everybody, please grab your phone, check in, let everybody know you're here at the Doc Holliday History of the Hall Roadshow. And then silence your phones, please. All right, tonight's presentation is going to be a lot of fun. Not because I'm here, it'll be because I'm here, not because I'm here. But we have got presidents, personalities, and people who have passed through either this depot or the depot that was here before this one was built. In the same exact spot, these people are going to be talking to you about their lives, their life stories, the things that happened here, all came through here. It should be a lot of fun. So on behalf of Main Street Denison, the award-winning Main Street Denison, Great American Main Street Award, and the Texas Award, yes. Miss Donna Dow, thank you much. Miss Grant Yoder, they were up in Tulsa, I think, at a state meeting that they came all the way back here just to be here for tonight. It's absolutely outstanding. Tonight's program is sponsored by the Red River Railroad Museum. I will not steal their thunder because they've got some great words, and it's a special for you all tonight. When we're all done, you're just going to wander right on down the hall and you get to preview what the museum opening is going to be, because the grand opening is going to be this coming weekend. So I'm going to ask Sam to go to the next slide because I forgot what I'm supposed to say. Oh, there we go. There's lots of history here. You'll hear about it included in the people's presentation. This is where our country back in 1873 was connected north-south, the first railroad connection north-south west of the Mississippi. That means right after the Civil War, all of the commerce, all of the beef, the cattle trail went right through here. But we figured out a way to get the beef to market faster and better. And that happened right here at Denison. So the Golden Spike happened right here as well. The next slide there. Next year, March 10th. So is this year? 27. Outstanding. All right. Is this where I turn it over to you, I think? Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, some of you probably attended our special event this past March in 2026. Doesn't it sometimes sound strange to say 2026, much less 2027, which I just did? But you'll see there the years. I'm sort of proud of that part. The first time when it happened, when they connected and the rail lines joined here in Denison, that was 1873. And so then it wasn't until 1993 that particular event was celebrated. And it was celebrated where the marker is over by what we call our rolling stock of trains to the east here. And so that was in 1993. And it was quite a hoopla from what we've seen. Brian Hander and others, Valerie Friels has quite a few photographs of it. But yes, they've documented that information. And then so we at the Red River Railroad Museum brought that back for 2025, repeated again in 2026, and we're looking forward to 2027. And I had hoped to have some photographs and videos of that, but we're not short on time, but it would take a little bit of time. But just to give you a little brief, if you weren't there, and those of you that were there would remember, we honored a longtime board member, John Scott, with an award, thanking him for his years of service. But one of the fun things was the driving of the Golden Stake, and he did it. He kept hitting it over and over and over. And then we had some things. We had a tie, a railroad tie, and of course, people being able to put the spike in, a spike in. And then we had another place in the ground with the grass for the kids, where we put one of the steel iron plates with the spikes. and they were able to put them in. That's the video I wanted to show you because it's easy to drive it into the dirt, but they had so much fun. So that's what we want to do every year is have fun. Let this be another tradition like Doc Holliday and others that we have here in our community, and to be able to invite people over to the trains and experience all that. We also opened up one of our cabooses for a tour. It's not a pretty sight on the inside, really. We hope someday to refurbish it a little bit. And then we also, with one of our units that's in the garage, which is down this way towards the end of the trains, we have what's called a little speeder, which was a small unit that would be placed on the track that they could take, the men could take 2 or 4 people could sit in it and take tools out to a work spot or else to check the track to make sure it was safe. And so anyway, we had that as a photographic area for families to take photographs. So look for us again out there in 2027. We'll be repeating that. So we thank you tonight for coming. And this is our, again, as I say, our 2026, and we just thank you for being our guests. And welcome to the Red River Railroad Museum's History in the Hall presentation. And what is it? Where history comes to life. That's why we dress up like this. We try to make it a lot of fun. And by the way, just looking in the back of the room, we had some people sit along the back benches. Take a look over there. They're all dressed up. I think they're waiting for a train. Hopefully it's not one of those because it's not moving, is it? Yeah. Horace, one of our guests here, Horace Groff, I wonder if Horace, do you think those trains would move at all? Over there? I don't think they would, do you? I don't think so. They've been there for quite a few years. But anyway, we represent the Red River Railroad Museum, and we try to bring history to life and make it interesting. Not only for adults, but each year we tour the 3rd graders from Denison ISD, plus some other private schools and independent schools around from Sherman and different smaller towns in the area. So we try to reach out as far as we can and teach a little bit about history. Well, tonight we abound with more stories about Denison's founding and entrepreneurs around the time of Doc Holliday and beyond. Your team of historical investigators, and you have heard them before. I know you've been to some of our events. This time they have dug deep, deep into Denison's past and uncovered a trove of revealing stories that you're sure to enjoy. So listen as we tell these stories of the many notable figures who traveled to Denison sometime between 1872 and 1965, when the city was a major passenger hub. Presidents, personalities, and passengers. We all know this map, or most of us do. You've been into the museum. We have several maps from different times and different years, but this one was 1873. And you can see over there to the left, the dark area, that's actually Forest Park, which we know that was a hubbub area where the people that were coming on the train to work and such during that era, they were living in that area in tents, and as well as other locations in town. You can see it wasn't a small town in 1873, was it? We're going to hear a little bit more about that. There was a lot going on. And if you look down in the lower portion there, you can see going to the left, which is really south. But anyway, you can see the MKT rail line, and then this side of it, the HTC rail line, just a little bit of separation there between those two. Well, I am the first presenter tonight to continue on, and who I'll be talking about is Edward King, who was a Scribner's Magazine author. Just a show of hands, we're not showing age, but you don't have to be a certain age to know this. Have you ever heard of Scribner's Magazine? Okay, you have, from the 1800s. Yes, well, he was one of their authors, and alongside with him was not a photographer, but an artist that traveled with him. He was called a sketch illustrator, and his name is J. Wells Champion. And so he illustrated the information that Edward King was writing. This is the book. If ever you want to get a good book, it's awfully thick, but it is so interesting. It's one of those you just sort of want to read the next page and the next page and the next page. But it's filled with the illustrations from the artist and then the words, of course, from Edward King. He was a very prolific writer. I will be reading as though it's him, so reading his literary work. And some of it's like an old English in a sense, and I may mess up on a few words because we're just used to reading things in a little bit different light. But what the book was titled, as you can see up there, is The Great South. And it was a series of stories that were published for several years in the Scribner's magazine, a series of stories about the South. And Scribner's was out of New York, and it had a lot of followers in the perhaps more developed part of the United States at that time. And so don't you know they were inquisitive of the West and what was going on out in with the railroad arriving in Denison or headed this way at that time. And so they, the owners, decided that they wanted someone to go visit these different areas, not only here, but also in the far South, to capture some of the stories. As you can see there in that square area, they traveled thousands and thousands of miles. Louisiana, you can see written there, Texas, the Indian Territory, which is north of us, that's present day Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina. Need I read more? It goes on and on. They traveled all through the South making their documentations of that. When it was all said and done, they compiled the book, this book, which has all the stories that were published with Scribner. Our focus tonight will be the state of Texas, though, and the states crossed to arrive in Texas via the Katy rail line. And so they took this trek, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as I read the script. Here's some direct observations from Edward King traveling through Indian Territory to Denison. The KTY, or Katy, railroad line provided to the author and his artist the disposition of a superb hotel car, sort of a Pullman style. I added that in, although those didn't come till years later. But they had a hotel car, and the train was, and it was equipped with a kitchen, a drawing, and a sleeping room. So the KTY Railroad provided this car, a few cars for him to travel in so as to write. They wanted to be a big part of this. Now, I say all of this, and you see I'm a little bit excited about it, because I think it's just so neat that in the East, they had heard about what was going on out West, and they wanted to know more. And so they were going to extreme ends sometimes to make that happen. The train car provision was well stocked and included an engineer, fireman, brakeman, and necessary staff. Oops, excuse me, it didn't catch up to me. With his perfection of travel, traveling at one's own will, we were given the power to stop at every turn with no feeling of haste. Whenever it seemed good to us, we dismissed our train to a sidetrack, wandered off, and sometimes into the woods to capture the hidden treasures of the land. So whenever they were to find while they're traveling down the track and they see a sidetrack, if they so will to be, they would just tell those driving the train, let's just go over here, and they would stop, and they'd get out, and they would walk. And that wasn't real safe territory. Keep in mind, leaving St. Louis, coming down through Missouri, Kansas, and the Indian Territory. So they were quite bold, I think, to have been doing that. Here in the illustrations, the first ones that we see, the conductor and Charlie. Charlie provided meals and sleeping car needs. He's the one in the lower portion. And then at the top is the conductor. And by the way, I'll give you an assignment. If you can find for me, please do. I tried to find a drawing or even a photograph of Edward King, and I found nothing. And he traveled throughout Europe, and he traveled, of course, in the United States. And he must have been one of those that want to be a little bit of a recluse. I don't know. Here's some descriptions from him as he visited Denison. And so he's already crossed the Red River, and they have come to the depot. And so we read on. Standing in the main street of Denison, Texas, the new town near the southern border of the Indian Territory, 621 miles southwest of St. Louis. It was hard to realize that only 4 months before my visit, this site was almost a wilderness, not a building of any kind having yet been erected here. For all around us was a wild rush of businesses, glory in affairs, and unabounding delight in mere labor by which one was once oppressed and appalled. The slightest indication of progress was pointed out as a gigantic foreshadowing of the future preeminence of Denison. They believed in Denison. In quotes here, there are from 2,500 to 3,000 people here now, said one gentleman to us. How's that for 4 months? They were on the move, weren't they? Denison sprang into existence as the chief town of the newly developed region. It was organized 4 months before my first visit, and since that time, the Denison Town Company, as it was called, had sold $9,000 worth of building lots. The town stands in a county absolutely free of debt and is at the outlet, one of the most fertile farming regions in the world. In 1873, 2 railroads coming to it from opposite points and not costing it a cent, laid the foundation for its remarkable advance, and advanced more like magic than like the normal growth of a pioneer settlement. Northern Texas, under its prophecies of greatness and railroad pioneering, had never been imagined before. As soon as the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas MKT Railway had crossed the Red River, a stream of immigration set in. The north to west movement of people in progress seemed to move in mass. The tracts of the wetland, which literally only needed to be tickled up with a plow to smile a harvest, were quickly taken up. Denison sprang into existence as the chief town of the newly developed region. Its destiny was to become great. Every third building in the place was a drinking saloon, with gambling that was filled after nightfall with a depraved, adventurous crowd. The gambling houses were nightly frequented by hundreds, and robberies occurred often. But the train passengers retiring in a hotel were safe as any first-class establishment could offer. In the lower left, there's a photograph of a scene in a gambling house, people playing Keno here in Denison. And on the right, men drunk but sober also dance to rude music. The next few slides, we'll be looking at a series of illustrations from their travel to and from Denison. We all on our area, in the Red River area, have seen ice here and there. Where this one was from, I don't know, because they traveled from St. Louis coming down. But it shows here that they found the ferries to be stranded on ice as they were trying to cross a body of water. And these are illustrations common to most early towns in the late 1800s, not only here, but a schoolhouse on the left with the children studying at their desks. And the bottom one, a cotton wagon cart with oxen going through the streets. And on the right, this one surprised me, a stock train from Sedalia receiving a squealing freight of wild hogs. Does it show up well enough to you? And so, sort of off to say, they have posts and poles and spears there as they're receiving the food, I guess, for the week. The businessmen of Denison are stern and self-reliant. They have a thorough belief in northern Texas and intend to tame its wildness and make it one of the gardens of the world. Businessmen from Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Western New York is evident everywhere in Denison, and it is the chief reliance of the town. The strong leadership came from the north and east as their investments drove their success. Here we have more illustrations, a gentleman from the Arkansas border. So these would be references and illustrations of those that might be seen up and down the streets. Not documented exactly where, but you can see the roughness of the individuals. A trader among the Indians in the second one. The ball players are fine specimens of men, was noted on it. The ball players, Choctaw has their game that they play with the balls back and forth, who continue to this day. So that was common throughout some of the tribal areas. And at the top, the cotton wagon, the train again, and then a terminus rough, just a rough person that had shown up. As I read earlier, you heard it said that people came from the east and the west and all around to come here to work, to live, to be a part of what they had heard it was. And that concludes my part, and we have our next presenter coming off the passenger bench.
Well, my fellow Americans, as your 18th president, when we get our slide up, as your 18th president, I am honored and humbled that you would invite me here for a visit to Denison. My administration is focused on reconciliation and on reconstruction. Remember, we are after this great conflagration that took our and separated our country that we are now trying to put back together. So I'm here on the afternoon of October 12th, 1874. I arrived last night about 11 o'clock at night, having left St. Louis earlier in the day. We traveled on the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas, or the Katy Railroad, at the invitation of Colonel Robert Stevens. Now, I knew Colonel Stevens. I was the president who gave him the authority to be the sole railroad to cross Indian Territory since the MKT had won the contest to the Kansas border. He, in turn, invited us to see exactly what Denison had become in the 22 months since it had been established, and offered the use of his Pullman car on a special train to travel down here. Well, I arrived with my wife, next slide, with my wife, oh, there should be one before that. Okay, I arrived with my wife.
My apologies. No worries.
I arrived with my wife, the commander of the Missouri District of the United States, General Philip Sheridan, my former Secretary of the Navy, Mr. Adolph Gorey. He is a prominent citizen of St. Louis, and along with him, they brought several other individuals with their ladies. And lastly was my private secretary, Mr. Orville Babcock. He recorded our trip. When we arrived at that late a date, there were nothing but oil lamps on the posts outside here. But my wife said, Hiram, that is my real name. You need to go out there on the platform and at least wave hi. So I did. Then I retired to the car that was then put on the siding of the railroad tracks just over here, so I wouldn't have to make this late night travel to the hotel. And we spent the night in the railroad car. So earlier this morning is when I stepped off, and reading the newspapers that came that day, I noticed it was noted an individual who said, well, he looks like he enjoys a good cocktail. Now, another individual stated that, well, he certainly looks well preserved. So I've been called worse, and I've been called better. So General Sheridan and I got in the carriage, and we visited the Educational Institute, a highlight of Denison that was finished just the day before we arrived. This was the first free school in the state of Texas, a tremendous building that had a bell tower in it that I understand has stayed through the future and is now at today's high school. But back then, the bell in the bell tower rang our arrival. And as we came there, we saw all the children dressed in their finest, their shoes shine, reciting patriotic verses and singing songs, and you could smell the plaster and the new paint, and it was a wonderful time. After that, we visited the saloons. Now, you have to understand that saloons in Texas back then were a gathering place, a social club, a courtroom of public opinion. And I really wanted to go there, besides one whiskey that I had, to be able to hear what the common folk had to say. Denison was different than the other cities of the South that I had been to. because of the railroad, there are people from all over the country, not just the South. It is that type of a makeup that required and demanded an educational institute for the children, the finest in the state of Texas. So we went to several saloons where I was told that these were much more refined than the saloons one street over on Skiddy Street. There's a remarkable lack of female companionship in the saloons that I went to. But we had a good time, and I had my ears full of commentary, both pro and con. And after that, we got into our carriage, and again, we traveled down Denison, which the mayor was so proud to show us. Of course, we had to go to the MKT rail tracks and see what the lifeblood of the city was. And then we traveled to the working yards and saw what it is that kept the trains on time. Denison back then was a premier cow town, and there was a stop along the cattle trails, but now was an endpoint because the stockyards where all the cattle were just being ready to go into the abattoir, the meat processing plant, that because of Denison's unique refrigerator car, after the processed meat was dressed, would go into the refrigerated car, packed full of artificial ice from the ice place that is just north of here, and then sent north to the waiting restaurants in Delmonico for New York, or if you wanted to go to San Francisco. It was a wonderful trip, one that I learned a lot. And as I was going back to the depot to get on the Houston and Texas Central train to go south, two African American ladies dressed in their Sunday finest approached me. Each one grabbed one of my hands and kissed it and thanked them for their emancipation. I kind of shook my head, and I understood freedom to them was more than their life, it was their lives now. And as I turned to get onto the stoop of the train, one voice yelled, "Hooray for Grant!" And there was kind of a ripple of applause until one other voice popped out, "Ah, shut up." As that military guy, I've heard worse. Got on the train, and as we were leaving, people were cheering, the band was playing, and though I'd never been to Texas again, this one day would stay in my mind, and Denison would be forever in my thoughts.
Thank you, President Grant. That's the stick. Said, my fellow countrymen and Americans, on Wednesday, April the 5th, 1905, I found myself steaming across the Red River and into the youthful, bustling town of Denison, the very threshold of my tour through the great and spirited state of Texas. I have always held Texas in high regard, for it was in Texas, in San Antonio, that I first gathered and organized the Rough Riders, with whom I charged in the Spanish-American War. As my train crossed into Texas at the Red River, we stopped in Denison. The citizens had declared a holiday. The banners were across the train tracks. The whole city was decorated for my appearance. I was told there were 5,000 people to greet the presidential train. They were along the rails, the rooftops, the windows, and all around the platform. They made me feel so welcome. I felt like I was home. I waved vigorously, and in the spirit of the West, I made this great looping motion in the air as though I was casting a lariat. I must say I practiced with a lariat That's why I just went like this, because I wasn't very good with the lariat. But then I was introduced by Miss Pauline Everett, who presented me with a wreath of the flowers in the shape of the American flag. It was 4 feet long and 3 feet tall, made with hundreds of flowers. My staff told me I need to say it at least once. It was a bully sight. I thought certainly it must have been created by some professional florist, but much to my surprise, it was created by the school children of Denison. President Grant, you stole my thunder. I was told on my tour that Denison built the first free public graded school in Texas. I also understand that model has been copied everywhere. Denison realizes the importance of an education and a well-rounded education to the state of Texas and to our nation as a whole. A fact that pleased me exceedingly, for nothing speaks more of a community's future than its schools. Well done, Denison. By 4 o'clock, we reached Sherman, where an immense throng, awaited. Residents from every corner of Grayson County, from North Texas, and even from southern reaches of the Indian Territory. Some 35,000 people had come by buggy, horseback, special trains, traveling as far as 175 miles to catch a glimpse of the president. There was a detachment of Rough Riders who joined me, and together we led a procession of 9 handsome carriers to the southeast corner of the courthouse square. I was also led by Confederate and Union soldiers who walked along those carriages. They were no longer combatants, they were Americans, and I honored them for their services. There, I delivered a brief 15 minutes address after being introduced by Colonel Cecil A. Lyon, my host in Sherman, and a man of sturdy character. Before leaving the stand, I made a point to shake the hand of every Rough Rider, for a man does not forget those with whom he has ridden in times of trial. When the tour concluded, preparations were made for a tremendous wolf drive in a vast 480,000 acre, get this, pasture near Lawton, Oklahoma in Indian Territory. Back home, we call that Rhode Island. As my train carried me toward the hunting grounds, every stop brought fresh crowds eager for a word or a handshake. At each place, I spoke of the promise of statehood, a matter of deep interest to the people of the territory. The hunt itself was a rousing success, and before the midday meal, I had brought down 3 wolves, a most exhilarating conclusion to a journey filled with the vigor, hospitality, and the indomitable spirit of the American Southwest. They told me to pay attention to the time. I've made a lot of speeches, and it has affected my voice, so I'm not quite as loud as I normally am. And any of you who think the presidency is easy, take a look at me. You'll notice I've got 1 or 2 gray hairs coming in. Yes, I do walk softly and carry a big stick. But then I realize that maybe if I speak a little quieter, people will listen. Back home in New York, there are many Roosevelts running around, and I got a nephew who thinks he's that and something else. If you should come upon this man and he introduces himself to you and he says, "Hello, my name is Franklin Delano Roosevelt," give him the benefit of the doubt. I wouldn't be a bit surprised to to hear that Denison at some time is the birthplace of a future president. I've also heard that the best chicken fried steak is right next door. So if you care to join me, I'd love to shake all of your hands. May God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Jack McGuire, and I'm a newspaper man. I've written some books, and there's a story in this book that I wrote years ago that is about something that happened to me. And so it's a very short one, but I entitled this little portion, "The President Who Helped a Denisonian Win a Bet." I was born and raised in Denison. So I'm a native and was going to Denison High School in 1936. I was 16 years old, I was a junior, and I wanted to be a newspaper man. And so I went and applied at the paper, the Denison Herald, for a summer job. And this is 1936, it was during the Depression, and there was reporters that were qualified to do the job. They were out of work, and so they said, no, thank you. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and just shoot for this. I'm gonna try to make a deal. And so I got together with Harmon Shelby, who was the Wire editor, and I said, look, if I can dig up a front page worthy story, would you hire me then? And he thought, you know, that's highly unlikely, but funny. And so I think, yeah, I'll do that. We will hire you for $5 a week if you can dig up a front page worthy story. And if not, then you'll quit bugging the editor and you'll just go away. And so I said, great, okay. So I knew that Texas Centennial was going on in Dallas and that President Roosevelt, not this one, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was going to be coming to open it. So at that time, everybody traveled by train. The president would be coming through by train. He would either be going through Texarkana or through Denison. And so I contacted the superintendent of transportation for the Katy Railroad and found out that he was indeed going to be leaving Dallas and going through Denison. And he was going to be doing a 20-minute stop for them to change the crew. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to write a letter to the president. So I wrote up a formal invitation, and I got over 1,000 students from Denison High School, just right up the street here, the one that they showed in the picture a while ago. And they all wrote their endorsement on there, and I did a cover letter, and I explained this bet. And so I bundled that up, mailed it to the president, and then I sent a letter to Congressman Sam Rayburn and asked him if he would help on that end to try to get me a yes. And so that went off, and lo and behold, FDR accepted. On June 13th, I think you have a slide of this, Sam. June 13th, 1936, over 25,000 people showed up to watch and listen to this speech. I'm not sure how many people were able to hear what he said, but at least they got to see get a glimpse of the president. So he gives his speech. I get the job. I get $25 a week. And then I went on from there to have a career in the newspaper. I wrote for over 50 years, over 500 columns. Larry King would one time introduce me as Mr. Texas because I had a nationally syndicated column that was called Talk of Texas. And all of that was because of a president, Katy Railroad, and a bet. And then I would also go on to write 7 books, that being one of them. And I became a PR executive, and then finally became the executive director of the Institute of Texan Cultures. All thanks to that bet, the Katy Railroad, and that president. Thank you all for your time.
Hello. I just got off the train. I'll just set this down here for a minute because I just wanted to stop and share a few things with you that I know about. So my name is Lucinda Rayburn, but most people just call me Miss Lou. That's the way it's always been. I was born in 1875 in Tennessee. My daddy was a farmer and also a Confederate veteran. I was the fourth of 11 children. So my mother, she was just that. She was a mother. What else could she be after having 11 children? Oh, yes. But I grew up in Tennessee, or I began growing up in Tennessee. Pretty strict Baptist family, very strict. Not a whole lot of love felt between children there. But one thing was that our parents really wanted us to get an education. That was essential, to get an education, to be able to make an influence on the country. So, in 1887, we moved from Tennessee. We went west to the big state of Texas. Yes, we landed in a little area called Flag Springs in Fannin County. And I just helped my mom. Here in the picture, you can see my brother, Will, and you can see Sam sitting there, and myself, and Bobby Phillips. She was the one who waited on us and took care of us. So we had lots of people that would come to the house to visit. We had luncheons from the church. And then my little brother Sam was elected to Congress in 1912. And then we really had a whole lot more people coming to the house because everybody wanted to talk to Sam. I'm not bragging just because he's my brother, but he was my little brother and smart as a whip and very well known and very well liked. In 1915, my parents decided we needed to move to a bigger house because of all of the people that were coming to visit Sam. So they built a house on 120 acres of land because my dad was still farming. And so that house was just to the west of Bonham. So Bonham became my home, and I lived there for the rest of my life. Planned to anyway. But Bonham suited me just fine because in Bonham, I was still very active in the Baptist church, but I was also part of the Flower Guild, and I was also part of the literature club, whatever they called it then. It was just a great place for me. And then in 1940, Sam became the Speaker of the House. It was a big deal in my family and a big deal for all of the people that lived all around us for him to be elected the Speaker. He was known to be one of the most powerful people in the legislative branch. And everybody kind of knew that. Well, I had to start accompanying Sam at that time because Sam was a bachelor. And I was his big sister, and he needed a social hostess, both in Washington, D.C. and back at our home in Bonham. So I started traveling with him on the train from Bonham to Washington, D.C., 2 nights and a whole day. Back, same amount of time to come back. But it was all for Sam. And I became his social hostess. I planned many events. I hosted parties. I hosted lots of social gatherings and things. And I think they kind of partied it up a lot in Washington, D.C., but when they came back to Bonham and they were around my house, there was no liquor on the premises. That came from my mother, and I just stuck to it because I stayed there in that house and I helped my mother and I kept things cozy and kept things in right condition for all the different people that would come to visit Sam and to talk to him about things that they thought should be happening. So I really enjoyed that, and the Katy Railroad just became a part of our life because we had come in from Bonham, get on the train here at the depot, go to Washington, D.C., 2 nights and a day, stay and stay and stay, and then come back 2 nights in a day. Yeah, it got long. But we had a lot of people that traveled with us, and a lot of those people that traveled with us were other congressmen or wannabe congressmen traveling on the train. And well, I got one in particular I want to tell you about. He was a rascal. I mean, he wanted to be the best friend that he could be to Sam. Yeah. You probably know him or know of him. His name was Lyndon. Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. Oh man. He was elected in 1937 to the Congress. And then when Sam became Speaker of the House, well, Lyndon wanted to be even closer and closer to him. He wanted to ride with him on every single train ride that he took and wanted to sit with him. Oh, he was something else. But we rode the Texas Special, and we were really enjoyed people, but sometimes Sam did get kind of bombarded. So much that finally the Katy offered him his own car. But he turned that down. He is very nice about it, that he wanted to stay among the people. He did want to know what they had to say. If anybody could get a word in from that little rascal I was telling y'all about, he always wanted to be up there rubbing shoulders with Sam. Mr. Lyndon, we got to know Mr. Lyndon very, very well. But it was a good life, and it provided lots of fun and lots of things going on. I met lots of people. I was in a lot of luncheons with other congressmen's wives, but since Lyndon didn't have a wife and I was his sister and his hostess, I got to go to those fancy luncheons with all of them and kind of hobnob with. I had one in particular that I can remember, probably heard of her too, Lady Bird. Yeah, Lady Bird Johnson. She had nice big meals that she held for the wives of congressmen. But I tell you, I think the best thing that I enjoyed the most about being with Mr. Sam, isn't he precious? Look at him there. Yeah. Anyway, one of my special things that I like to do the best when we went to Washington is I liked for them to haul us around in a chauffeured car. That was pretty nice, yeah. So I just wanted to share some of those things with you and tell you that my brother played a big part in making the United States the way that it is. Katy Railroad played a big part in getting us back and forth to where we had to be in order for him to be able to do that. So I'm not going to take any more of your time because we'll be catching another train, but I did want to tell you one more thing about Lyndon. Lyndon being on there every time that we went. Well, he lived in Austin, but he went ahead and rode the train right on into Denison with us so that he could be there with Sam the whole trip. And then he would catch another train back to Austin, and we would go on back to the homestead in Bonham. So I hope that I've given you some history here that you appreciate, and I thank you all very much.
I am Dwight David Eisenhower, 34th President of the United States, and was the Supreme Commander of Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe during World War II. Not bad for a man who didn't know where he was born. I could plan D-Day, but it seems I had to be told by the Denison Chamber of Commerce that I was born in their fair city. I always thought I'd been born in Abilene, Kansas, where I was raised. But in my defense, my family lived here for only 18 months after my birth, and consequently, I had no memory of being born a few blocks from here on October 14th, 1890. My parents, David and Ida, came to Denison in 1889, and I was the third of their 11 or 7 sons. It seemed like there were 11 sometimes. But I was their only child that was born in Texas. My father had lost his job in Kansas and came to Texas to work at the MKT Railroad. Anxious to have employment at all, he gratefully took a job washing soot-covered trains. There's one of them going by right now. It was not a prestigious job, but he was grateful for any employment to support his young family. As I learned later, we lived in a house so near the railroad tracks that passing trains must have rattled the windows. My family lived in that house for a short term and then moved back to Abilene, Kansas. Then in 1911, I landed an appointment to West Point, and I graduated in 1915 as a commissioned second lieutenant. Upon my graduation, I was stationed at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio and served on the Mexican border. It was in San Antonio where I met my wife, Mamie Geneva Dowd, who was from Colorado and was spending the winter in San Antonio with her family. 9 months after we met, on July 1st, 1916, we were married. And coincidentally, I was promoted to first lieutenant on my wedding day. For the first 3 years I was stationed in San Antonio, I found myself traveling in and out of the state frequently on the Katy line. The 2 depots that I was most familiar with was the magnificent one in San Antonio named Concepcion. It was fashioned after the Spanish Mission, and then Denison's Union Station. The Texas Special typically changed crews here at the Denison stop. Little did I know my connection to this city and that I was born only a few blocks from the station. So how did I learn about the city of my birth? Well, during World War II, when my name was often in the news as commander of the Allied troops in Europe, a woman who was a neighbor of my family's here in Denison recalled that there had been a family named Eisenhower that lived nearby. The neighbor, known as Miss Jenny, remembered she used to rock a baby on her knee. The family had named the baby Dwight. Curious, she went to Tone Abstract Company with her story, and they verified a family named Eisenhower did live on Day Street and had a child named Dwight. I had the honor of meeting Miss Jenny when I visited my birthplace in 1946. My life is forever bound to the town of Denison and to the great state of Texas. I was honored when the Katy Employee magazine highlighted my career and my connection to this remarkable railroad enterprise. An enterprise that helped build Denison, powered the growth of the Southwest, and shaped the very course of our nation's progress. I thank you.
In the last days of March 1921, I boarded a train in Indianapolis, Indiana, then changed trains in St. Louis and boarded Katie's premier Texas special and headed south to visit my sister in Waco, Texas. I enjoyed the comfort of the Texas special, but by the time we rolled into Denison, I was ready for my 2-hour layover and grateful for the chance to stretch my legs. Just as I arrived, a sudden stir swept through the depot, and the crowd surged toward a passenger who had just stepped off another arriving train. Curious, I strained to see, but the wall of excited bodies blocked my view. Beside me stood a tall young father and his young son. The boy clutching his hand, eyes wide at the commotion. "What's happening?" I asked. The father leaned forward to see. Thomas Marshall just got off that train. That name hit me instantly. Being from Indiana, I knew it well. Thomas R. Marshall, our former governor, and the man who had served as vice president through both of Woodrow Wilson's terms. He was never a loud figure in national politics. If anything, he moved through Washington with a quiet dignity. But his dry Hoosier wit was unforgettable. At the time he served, the vice presidency carried almost no real duties, no seat in cabinet meetings, no influence on policy. It was political limbo, and he knew it. But instead of frustration, Marshall chose humor. He handled the situation with a smile and a one-liner ready for any occasion. He often told the story of two brothers. One went off to sea and the other became the vice president of the United States. Nothing was ever heard from either of them again. Marshall also gave us another memorable quip. On the Senate floor, a long-winded senator had barely gotten out his usual opener, "What this country needs," when Marshall, tired of the routine, cut in and finished it for him. "A good 5-cent cigar." And just like that, the punchline outlived the speech. My thoughts drifted to the difficult years of the Wilson administration. In 1919, President Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke that left him unable to carry out his responsibilities. The country and Marshall were kept in the dark concerning the severity of his infirmity. Instead of turning to his capable vice president, Wilson turned to his personal physician and his wife, Edith Wilson, a poorly educated widow of a jewelry store owner. Edith's decisions were guided by two priorities: protecting her husband's health and safeguarding his legacy, as she ineptly oversaw the affairs of the nation. At the time, the Constitution offered no clear process for declaring a president unable to serve. Many urged Marshall to step in, but without official confirmation of disability, he refused. So the nation continued without real leadership until the end of Wilson's term in 1921. I was pulled back from my reflections to the happenings at the depot. Marshall was speaking now, surrounded by admirers, clearly enjoying himself. He raised his voice so all could hear. "Well," he announced with a grin, "I have no hesitancy in putting my foot off at this station, and by all indications, it's a safe place to do so." Laughter rippled through the depot, and I couldn't help but wonder if the reputation of Denison's rough years had reached his ears prior to arrival. I turned to the young father and son still beside me. "Where are you two traveling?" "Oh, we're not traveling," the father said warmly. "We live nearby. We like to walk to the depot to watch the trains come in. Sometimes we get ice cream, but he nodded toward the crowd. But this is a real treat. He and his son edged forward, eager to catch a glimpse of the former vice president. Then Marshall's eyes landed on them. He reached into his pocket, flipped a quarter into the air, and sent it spinning toward the boy. Astonished, the boy caught the coin. "Son," he said, "go get me a newspaper." I noticed the father discreetly took the quarter from his son and slipped it into his vest pocket, and then replaced it with one of his own, quietly preserving the vice president's coin before sending the boy off to the newsstand. Marshall continued entertaining the crowd until the child returned, breathless, holding out the paper. "Thank you, son," Marshall said, taking it with a nod. The father and the son soon slipped away, the quarter tucked away safely in the father's pocket. When they reached home, the father wrapped the coin in a small square of paper and wrote on the outside, "V.P. Marshall." Years passed, the boy grew up, had sons of his own, and life carried on. The family kept a safe deposit box at a local bank that changed hands many times over the decades. Nearly a century after that day in the depot, the final owner of the bank announced it would close, and it was time to empty the old box. One of the sons, now grown, opened it and placed the contents in a bag and took it all home. Much later, he and his wife went through the contents. Among the yellowed papers and deeds lay a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" the wife asked. Puzzled, the husband shook his head. Then suddenly a memory emerged. The memory of standing beside his father at the bank many years earlier, watching them add another imported paper into the box. Seeing the folded paper, he asked about it and heard the story of the day his father met a former vice president of the United States and was handed a quarter to buy a newspaper. And there it was, the coin. And here it is now. A small keepsake from a simple meeting in Denison's Katy Depot. A brief exchange that stayed with one family for 100 years. This is a true story. Not a headline or a grand moment in history, but a gentle reminder that we're always just one generation away from losing the stories that shaped us. I know this story personally. I am much younger wife in the picture with my husband, Sandy Frills. I first heard the story from him, and he heard it from his father, the little boy who was sent to get a newspaper for a former vice president. That is why the Red River Railroad Museum exists, to keep memories alive and to honor the people that made Denison what it is today. In a few minutes, you'll be invited to walk through the museum in its new home. And as you look around, I hope you'll feel the pride and the history that so many have worked to preserve. And I hope you'll consider becoming a part of that effort as a member, as a volunteer, as someone who believes these stories matter. What this country needs are people like you.
Everyone followed that story. We moved it to the end most appropriately. We were practicing through it. Thank you, Valerie, for sharing that so much. And thank you to each one of you as being our guest tonight. And a special thank you to the George Tavern for hosting History in the Hall in the Pullman Room. And as Valerie just mentioned, excuse me, we have Kurt coming up to remind us what we don't want to forget.
Thank you much. You give Sam a round of applause, please. If you haven't been to the new Red River Railroad Museum, you need to do that. It's really nice. It's not as big there, but it is more intimate. There's so many things there. I will tell you, every time I go in there and go around there, I see something new. Please, Valerie Friels is the one who wrote almost all of those scripts, and we had to put that story last. And both she and I almost couldn't make it through there without bawling our eyes out. So, as I said, this was the last of our 4 History in the Hall roadshows. We'll see you again next year, I hope. But before you do, please don't forget next week, Friday, right here, hopefully out on the porch, if the weather allows, for the Bandits Bluegrass and Barbecue that is done in support of the Denison Girls and Boys Club. And then Saturday, you didn't hear me on TV, 10,000 people can't be wrong if you come on here to our Doc Holliday Festival, because there's just so much fun that's going to be. There's going to be gunfights. There's going to be a petting zoo. There's going to be Frontier Village. It's the first weekend of the farmers market. There's going to be a scavenger hunt. There's going to be all kinds of fun. You name it, you're going to find it. You just have to walk around the construction that's still going to be there. But the dulcimers, I will take the Hyde Park signers are going to be there. So without any further ado, thank you all very much for coming tonight. Be sure you pay your bill there for George Tavern and stop by and see the museum. Thank you all very much for coming.